I'm honored to be here tonight, and I don't say that lightly. Those of you know that the most meaningful compliments or awards or nice gestures that you receive mean the most when they come from people who really know you, and they still are prepared. I really mean it. Think about it. I measure the value of an award by how much I value the people giving the award. And the men that were mentioned tonight, from Howard Baker, who I had the great honor of doing his eulogy, one of several people, to Tom Daschle, who's been my friend since he came to the Senate, George Mitchell, who is someone I've gone to for advice often, to Bob Dole, who when I got there as a 29-year-old kid in 1972, was there to extend a welcome to me. You know, President Obama always kidded me from the outset, because I once said that it's presumptuous of me to try to improve on anything Tip O'Neill has ever said when he said all politics is local. I think he was partially right. In my view, Senator Snow, all politics is personal. I mean that sincerely. It's personal. It matters that you understand and know the other person. It matters even with foreign leaders whom you have nothing in common, but you at least get to the point where you understand what their needs are and limits are, and whether or not you can trust what they say. Because everyone who's worked up on the Hill, and many of you have, who served on the Hill, know that the coin of the realm is your word. The coin of the realm is whether or not you can be trusted to do what you say you'll do. When I first got to the Senate, for the first 2 decades, there were an awful lot of men and not enough women, but women, we're changing that, who would give you their word as to what they would do. And when circumstances changed that would made it more difficult for them to do it, they'd still step forward and do it anyway. And then we started to see, at least I did, in the 90s, thereabouts, people would promise you what they were going to do and you'd work out something and then say, I'm sorry, my circumstances have changed. I can no longer do that. These men and women, including Olympia Snowe is here, and our former Secretary of Agriculture, never did that. There's a second thing that they've never done. A lesson I learned from Mike Mansfield. When I first got to the Senate, I didn't want to be there. And Senator Mansfield and Kennedy and a fellow named Pastore, you may not remember, from the state of Rhode Island, and Fritz Hollings, and later the senator from Ohio, Saxby, is one of the funniest guys I've ever worked with. They all came to see me and said, come and just serve for 6 months. And I really thought they meant it, that they needed me to just stay 6 months. And George, you heard me say this before, but I used to go to Senator Mansfield's office every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And I'd get an assignment. And I really thought as a kid, all senators got assignments. I really did. I know that's naive, but I'm the first senator I ever knew. But I really did. And it took me till about the beginning of May to realize he was just taking my pulse to see how I was doing. And one day I was walking across the floor down to the well to find out when the last vote would be to get in the train to go home to Delaware. And Jesse Helms was up there excoriating you, Bob, and Ted Kennedy for a precursor for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Talking about how we had no obligation. I thought it was heartless, and thank goodness, although I never had a temper, as you know, thank goodness I had to meet with Senator Mansfield. I went in and I sat in front of him, and he spoke in clipped tones all the time. He said, "What's the matter, Joe?" and I went off on Jesse Helms, saying he had no social redeeming value. What's going on here? How could he be so heartless, and so on and so forth? And he sat and he listened to me, and he looked at me and said, Joe, what would you say if I told you Dot and Jesse Helms in 1969 were sitting in their living room in Raleigh? There was an advertisement before Christmas in the paper. A young man, 14 or 15 years old, in braces up to his hips, steel braces and steel crutches, saying, all I want for Christmas is someone to love me and take me home. So what'd you say, Joe, if I told you Jesse and Dot Helms adopted that young man? That they did. I said, I feel foolish. He said, Joe, I've learned something a long time ago. It's always relevant to question another man or woman's judgment in debate. And you need not ever make any apology for that. But it's never relevant to question their motive, because you do not know. From that moment on, I and the men I'm talking about and women never questioned anybody else's motive. Because once you question the motive, you can't get to go. You can't get to a place where you can reach an agreement. Our politics, as the reason this center was set up, and Jason, you're doing a heck of a job, has become much too negative, too nasty, too petty, too personal, and yes, too partisan. Compromise has literally become a dirty word. We don't just question other people's judgment. We disagree with them. We question their motivation now. If you don't agree with me, it's because you're in the pocket of somebody. If you don't agree with me, you're being bought off. If you don't agree with me, it's because you are not a good person. We don't know each other anymore. It's hard to dislike a woman or man on the other side when you understand their problems. You realize they may have a son or a daughter with a serious health problem, or a wife or a husband with breast cancer or colon cancer, or that they have struggles at home. It's hard. It's hard not to understand them. We used to travel together. I went out, guys, and only went up to the Senate dining room, the private one. The tables aren't there anymore. We used to sit down and eat lunch together privately. It's gone. No one's there anymore, George. I went in to see if I'd catch up with my old and my newer colleagues. There's lounge chairs in there. There's no tables. There used to be 2 big tables. So, folks, I guess the point I want to make is this, and you've been standing too long. Unlike any other nation in the world, we are uniquely a product of our political institutions. And that's not hyperbole. You cannot define an American by ethnicity, by their race, by their religion, by the culture from which they come. You cannot do it. It's not possible. You can't even define an America anymore, and will not be able to very shortly, as a predominantly white European stock nation. What holds this nation together, and always has been an intuitive and expressed commitment to the Constitution, to our institutions. Our institutions are what have held us together. A belief that they can deliver. And what worries me most, and I never thought I'd have to make this speech or want to make this speech, the almost drumbeat of denigration of the institutional structures that govern us is dangerous. When you delegitimize the courts, you delegitimize the legislative body. It's corrosive. And it makes it almost impossible to reach compromise. We're a diverse nation, as has been pointed out. We're a great nation. That to work this democracy, in order to be able to function, you have to remember it requires consensus at the end of the day. Without consensus, we have chaos. And it's not just Joe Biden saying this, it's our Constitution. And we have to remind ourselves how important this document is. And I'm not trying to be Professor Joe Biden and talk constitutional law. I'm talking about the essence of what it is. It's that we really do believe all men and women are created equal. That's the deal. We really do think that there should be separation of powers without even knowing the doctrine of separation of powers. We know the court, when it rules, that it has the right to overrule a Congress or a president. And it should be adhered to after the appeals are had. We know because we've been through constitutional crises together, including impeachments and other very, very, very divisive things that happened since 1973 when I got there. We know that we have to check the power of presidents, that the legislature, the Congress is as important. They used to kid me in our White House. I was the only guy that actually thought there was a Congress. That didn't matter. You think I'm joking? You think I'm joking? But there's a tendency today to not. As we look over the history and the time, again, we've faced monumental crises. And the story of America, our American institutions, is that they've always sustained us. And, when we lift these institutions up, we derive strength from it. It's the basis upon which we can make the compromise. When we ignore them, or worse, when we tear them down, we do it at our own peril. I must say, these beliefs are so basic and so fundamental that I really think average Americans fully get it. They understand it. But when they lose confidence in it, that we're a nation of laws and not men, that courts make a difference, that they're the ultimate arbiter, and so on, things begin to crack. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm somewhat saddened that this is the first time I've made this speech to such a distinguished audience. As I stand in this room, in this building, I can't help but say there's another institution, the Fourth Estate, the free press, that if we undermine or destroy, we do it at our own peril. And let me tell you, let me say something. Say something that someone like all of us has taken more than my fair share of hits from the press. I've been covered by the very best in the business and some of the worst. Some of you press guys are lousy, just like some senators are lousy, like doctors are lousy, lawyers are lousy. But it doesn't matter. We should never challenge the basic truth that an independent and free press is a fundamental element in functioning of our democracy. I know you hear a lot quoted about Thomas Jefferson these days, about how he argued with the press. I remind you what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, if it were left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without the government, I should not hesitate a moment to choose the latter. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. That doesn't mean that all of us hadn't had run-in disputes with the press we thought wasn't being fair to us. But the idea to question the actual legitimacy of a free press is one of the most dangerous things out there. The degree that we depart and denigrate our institutions of the Fourth Estate, I think we really, honest to God, weaken our ability for self-government. We understand our democracy. We undermine it. We become weaker, not stronger. And again, don't just take my word for it. Admiral McCraven, who you all know I worked with very closely, particularly during the Bin Laden raid. This is a true patriot. This is not some, left-leaning, liberal, whatever you want to characterize it. This guy's a patriot. President Obama risked his entire presidential career on trusting his judgment about Osama bin Laden. He just said last week that the belief that the news media is the enemy of the American people, quote, may be the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. Ask John McCain, another patriot, who understands what it means to sacrifice what you believe in. And finally, here in this building, there are 2,291 reporters' names from around the world who died in the pursuit of what they thought to be the truth, and whose names are etched in the museums and memorial, so their service is never forgotten. Folks, this may be the first time in my career that I've, as I said, thought it was important to make this speech, but we all have bipartisan responsibilities to this nation. To defend principles that have long made America the beacon of hope, as Ronald Reagan said, the shining city on the hill. To protect the institutions that have made it possible for these principles to be sustained. We're respected around the world, as I've said many times, been criticized for saying, not merely for the example of our power, but for the power of our example. That's why the rest of the world repairs to the United States of America. That's the place from which we get the gravamen of our legitimacy. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how we've always survived, with our significant difference. That's how we forge consensus. That's how we check abuse of power. We take so much for granted. But ladies and gentlemen, as recent experience have made clear, we can't forget that the great success of this nation isn't guaranteed. There's nothing guaranteed about democracy, nothing guaranteed about self-governance, even after 240-some years. There's nothing guaranteed that we will remain the greatest economic machine in the world, the greatest power in the world. There's nothing guaranteed about any of that. There's no guarantee that we'll remain the greatest. The fact of the matter is, every generation has to earn it. And we've been so used to patriots like Bob Dole offering and giving his life nearly for the nation. And we think it's sort of axiomatic, it's automatic. It's just going to keep happening. Folks, I promise you, read your history, there's nothing guaranteed. And you know, just like every question before us, every generation before us has, we got to earn it. And we're not going to do that if we're tearing each other apart. We've got to stop being blinded by anger. We've got to see each other again. And continue to focus on hope and the things that unite us. I've always believed that we're strongest when we're one America, and I really mean that. Rich, poor, middle class, black, white, Hispanic, gay, straight, transgender. Folks like my family and all of yours at some point who came to this country with a dream. New immigrants arriving today. One America. We're all in this together. Everybody does their fair share. We can argue about what that share is. That's the difference in the parties. It makes sense to argue about it. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got to move beyond where we are today. Let me conclude by saying to you that I ran for the United States Senate as a 29-year-old kid for two reasons. I ran for the United States Senate because I came out of the civil rights movement. I was no great shake. I was just a kid in a segregated state that thought it was wrong and got engaged when I was in high school, and there wasn't anything heroic about what I did. Sit-ins and desegregating restaurants. But you know what? I came because I disagreed with, quite frankly, almost all the old segregationists were Democrats in those days when I got there in 1973. And I started off on a committee as the most junior guy, I think, ever on that committee. The Judiciary Committee was Strom Thurmond. And I served with Strom for over 30-some years. I can't remember, I think it was 28 years. And Strom and I actually became friends. And people don't know before it was over that if you listen, if you try to understand what another geographic area is going through, if you listen, it can actually change you. When Strom Thurmond left, he voted for the extension of the Voting Rights Act. When Strom Thurmond left, he had a higher percentage of African Americans in the staff than any staff, including Teddy Kennedy. Didn't make up for the past sins, but there was change. On his 100th birthday, I got a call from, he was in the hospital. I got a call from Nancy Thurmond. She called and she said, "Joe," in that southern accent, she said, "Joe, I'm here with Strom's doctor. We're at the nurse's station. Strom asked if I'd come out and ask you to do a favor." And I said, "Sure, Nancy, anything at all." She said, "Joe, Strom wants you to do his eulogy." I did Strom Thurmond's eulogy. And I was honest in the eulogy. I didn't say anything that I didn't believe. Although I did start off by looking up at heaven and saying to my grandfather Finnegan, "Grandpa, forgive me for what I'm about to do." But all kidding aside, if you look hard enough, you can even find the possibility of some agreement and change in people with the most extreme views. Last night, we heard some talk about bipartisanship. Last night, we heard an address that was much more presidential in tone than anything we've heard before. Last night, we heard a lot about how we will continue to disagree. But there was talk of bipartisanship. But as the old saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. But my wish is we find some way to make progress in bipartisanship, even in this atmosphere. But we cannot continue to denigrate our institutions. Thank you for this great honor. I'm flattered to be part of it.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Biden is a patriot. Joe Biden is a political institution. And Joe Biden just delivered the best description of political empathy that I think I've ever heard. Thank you for joining us tonight. We got the room for a few hours. Spread out. We'll talk to you soon.
No problem, man.